In the uncharted drift beyond Orion's cradle, a derelict starship floated like a memory abandoned by time. It bore no markings of nation or creed, only scars from battles long past and symbols too ancient for human eyes. The vessel, named Virelia, was once part of a colonization effort, but its final log was over 3 centuries old, lost to both human record and cosmic concern. It moved now not by force, but by the ghostly pull of gravity fields, gliding past a dark, collapsed star whose light had long vanished into singularity. The silence here was not empty, it was watchful. For this region of space, designated Sector Tower 9, was off-limits for reasons never fully disclosed. Even Black Ops charts marked it only with a red circle and a single phrase, "Do not engage." Unknown phenomena. Yet Virelia had returned. Or rather, something brought it back. No signal, no distress beacon, no life signs, but it was transmitting. A low-frequency hum that caused ripples in time data synchronization protocols. Earth's Deep Space Command intercepted it just once before it stopped. The recording was mostly static, except for one repeated whisper in distorted human tongue. They never left, and neither did we. Now, the Council sends a new crew not to rescue, not to recover, but to confront. Commander Elias Rain, chosen for his cold logic and unshakable will, leads a team aboard the exploratory vessel Stanza 2. Their mission is not to return home. It's to understand what happened, and why Virelia, a ship lost to history, came back across starless voids with its silence broken only by that haunting voice. As they near the forgotten star, sensors detect impossible gravitational warps, and memories not their own begin to stir. They are not alone. And they were never meant to arrive. The air inside Stanza 2 was colder than protocol allowed, and yet no one reported the deviation. It wasn't failure of engineering, it was something else, something unspeakable, as though the ship itself had begun to breathe slower, as if it were holding its breath. Commander Elias Rain stood motionless before the central interface. The console, built to project calibrated star maps, was now rewriting itself. Entire regions of known space blinked out, replaced by fractal constellations none had seen before. The crew, a diverse collection of specialists, xenolinguist Dr. Miratal, systems architect Leon Bach, sensor tactician Ishrovan, and medical technologist Sonia Kaur, watched in quiet dread. None spoke of the strange vertigo they felt when looking too long into the projections. Mira muttered once, unconsciously, "These aren't stars, they're signals." No one questioned it, for they had all sensed it too. A presence in the data. The maps weren't navigational. They were alive, reacting to them, shifting in accordance with something beyond logic. At 3:47 Universal Time Coordinated, the ship registered a gravitational pulse from the Virelia's last known location. But it was not merely gravity, it was layered with rhythmic frequencies, coded with geometries that echoed in the human nervous system. Leon collapsed momentarily, convulsing, before rising again with no memory of the incident. He murmured a string of syllables in a language unknown. Mira recorded it and stared at the waveform. It had symmetry like DNA spirals interlaced with golden ratio patterns. Rain issued a red alert, not for danger, but to prepare the minds of the crew for what came next: contact. Not with creatures, but with something that whispered through photons and bent navigation paths with thought. Sonia, reviewing cryomedical logs, found discrepancies. Her biosignature showed a heartbeat pattern that hadn't matched her own since Earth. "That's not mine," she whispered, but her voice trembled, as if part of her knew otherwise. Ishro, monitoring sensor arrays, picked up flickers of movement on the outer rim, shadows dancing on the edge of lightspeed, faster than relativity should allow. Stanza 2 was drifting into territory ruled not by physics, but by memory encoded in dark matter itself. The AI core refused to translate the incoming signals, instead printing a single line: "They remember you." Rain exhaled slowly. The line between observer and observed was thinning. Virelia was close. But what lay within her hull was no longer human. And the closer they drew, the more Stanza 2 felt like a question being asked by the void itself. The moment Stanza 2 latched to Virelia, silence roared louder than any storm. Docking was smooth, too smooth, like the ships remembered each other. As the airlocks hissed open, an unnatural cold seeped through the seals, not from the absence of heat, but from a presence that fed on warmth, thought, and certainty. Rain was the first to step into the corridor of Virelia. The moment his boot made contact, the floor lit up in soft pulses of bioluminescent veins, like capillaries recognizing old blood. Behind him, Mira froze. These walls, they're reading us. The black residue that clung to every surface wasn't mold, nor carbon scoring. It was alive, reactive to breath, to motion, to fear. When Leon brushed his gloved hand against it, the substance squirmed, releasing what sounded like laughter in reverse. They pressed forward. The corridors twisted in ways the original blueprints didn't support. Hallways leading to the same room, time dilation anomalies in localized zones, doors that opened before anyone approached. Time inside Virelia didn't flow, it unraveled. In the med bay, Rain found cryotubes shattered from the inside. Names still glowed on each panel. He read them aloud. Captain Sora, Delegate Engineer Hrint. Psych Officer Elon Mora. All long dead. Except for one tube, still sealed, still blinking. The name on it read, Rain Elias. The crew fell into stunned silence. Mira scanned it, confirming biometrics. "It's you," she whispered, heart pounding. But the vitals showed 32 years of stasis. "Impossible," Rain muttered. "I've never been here." Yet the machine disagreed. It tracked brain activity as active, as if the Rain they followed was the shadow, and this one, asleep, the original. Sonia examined the system and found neurofeedback synced perfectly with Rain's heartbeat. "Whatever this place is, it knew you before you were born," she said. In a room deeper in, Ishro discovered fragments of messages carved into the metal walls, not in ink or laser, but as though the ship itself had grown them. Sentences in multiple languages, some lost to time, others eerily modern. One read, "We are the children who returned to Mother Darkness." Another, "To become what made us, we had to forget what we were." Outside, stanza 2 systems began powering down, not from energy loss, but as if obeying a signal from Virelia. Rain issued the retreat order, but the hatch behind them no longer existed. Only wall. They weren't trapped. They had been accepted. Or harvested. Or remembered. For Virelia was no longer a ship. It was a relic of consciousness, an arc of minds that never stopped dreaming, even when the bodies failed. And now, it wanted theirs. They descended deeper into the Virelia, past decks that bent space in subtle curves, where gravity felt like it argued with itself. Their steps echoed not just in sound but in sensation, as if each footfall repeated in their bones moments after it occurred. No one could tell if it was the ship playing with perception, or if perception itself was being reprogrammed. At the heart of the vessel, the crew entered a chamber unlike any human architecture, spherical, fluid in shape, yet perfectly proportioned to a divine ratio unknown to Earth science. The walls were translucent and layered like neural tissue, pulsing with warm amber light. Symbols danced across the surface, orbiting them like living thoughts. They resembled no language, but Mira swore she could almost read them, not with cognition, but with memory. "They're not words," she whispered, "they're feelings, preserved." Leon stepped forward, brushing the air. And the symbols changed course, swarming around him, scanning his neural frequency. Suddenly, he staggered backward, eyes unfocused, and began to speak in the voice of someone long gone. "We left the skin of Earth not to colonize, but to remember what the stars had forgotten. We failed. And in our failure, something else remembered for us." The voice was female. It matched no one in the crew. But Mira matched the audio with the last known captain of Virelia. Sora Delegate Leon collapsed, blood trickling from his ears. Sonia administered stabilizers, but the readings were erratic. His neural map had temporarily changed, carrying signature imprints unknown to human DNA. Rain remained calm on the surface, but his hands trembled behind his back. Virelia wasn't haunted by the dead. It was housing something more profound, the memories of its original crew. Their thoughts had been etched into the ship's materials, not metaphorically, but chemically, neurologically. "They uploaded themselves," Sonia said. "Not into a server, into the walls, into the systems, into the hull. The ship was the crew. A consciousness fragmented and held in recursive loops. They had created a living tomb of themselves, preserved by a technology not made by human hands, but retrofitted into Virelia. Rain approached a node in the center, shaped like a pulsating heart of mirrored metal. It showed him images, flashes, not with light, but by forcing memories into his head that weren't his: a child screaming in a low-gravity chamber, stars melting into red spirals, an alien shape made of angles that didn't obey physics, and a crew reaching toward it in worship. He dropped to his knees. The ship whispered, "You've come to finish what we began." And beneath that whisper, something else older, deeper, said, "Or to take your place in the pattern." They realized then, this wasn't just a ship. It was a signal in physical form. An invitation. A test. A choice. And maybe, a trap laid long before Earth ever learned to look upward. Something was happening to space. Not inside the ship, outside it. Through the cracked observation dome, Ishro saw stars dancing unnaturally, weaving patterns that broke all celestial law. They weren't exploding or collapsing, they were shifting in positions faster than light would allow, moving into geometries that formed spirals within spirals, mandalas too perfect for accident, too complex for design. When Sonia turned to observe them, she gasped, because as she looked through the glass, she also saw herself, standing beside Rain, only she wasn't there. A double and echo mimicking her movements exactly half a second before she made them. "It's not a reflection," she said, voice hollow. "It's a delay, in time." Outside, stanza 2 was frozen. No engine hum, no external motion, its lights locked in static pulse, as though time had stopped completely for the ship. They'd become detached from the flow of linear causality. "We've entered a folded dimension," Ishro muttered. "No. We've been invited into it." The room brightened suddenly, not from any source of light, but from a sudden infusion of memory. Not theirs. They began to remember events they never lived. Rain saw himself walking corridors of Virelia years before this mission. Mira felt the grief of a child dying in low orbit. Leon remembered unlocking a vault and releasing something he couldn't comprehend, something that looked like music made flesh. The ship wasn't just communicating. It was merging. It was collapsing boundaries between past, future, self, and other. The veil between the original Virelia crew and them was growing thin, like tissue stretched over steel. Rain pulled up his own identity log from his portable core. But instead of his own data, the screen displayed coordinates, 11 of them each corresponding to locations across deep space where similar anomalies had been recorded over centuries. "This isn't isolated," Mira whispered. "Virelia is one of many." They all stood silent, realizing that this event, this contact, this awakening, it wasn't a singular curse but a pattern woven into the galactic tapestry. Rain then asked aloud, "What is it they want?" And the chamber responded, not with voice, but with feeling. A cascade of images filled their senses, civilizations reaching upward, being consumed by their own desire to know, their minds absorbed into an expanding network of memory. It wasn't death. It was something worse. Immortality without identity. Legacy without will. "They want to make us part of the record," Mira said, tears forming. "They want to store us as meaning." Outside, space folded again. Another star blinked and changed position. Rain realized they weren't watching the stars move. They were watching reality being rewritten. The galaxy was rearranging to accommodate an intelligence older than biology, one that used memory the way others used engines. They had passed beyond the threshold of curiosity and now they were being archived. Not as humans, but as echoes. The stairwell to Virelia's lowest chamber spiraled endlessly, as if space had lost its end coordinates. Every step was heavier than the last, as if gravity was rewriting its origin beneath their feet. Rain led the descent, guided by a hum no device registered, a frequency that burrowed not into ears, but into thoughts. They reached a chamber whose floor was absent. Instead, there was a void, a pulsating sphere of collapsed darkness levitating above nothing. Surrounding it were bodies. 12 of them. Floating in perfect orbit. Each one human. Each one long dead. Yet each one smiling. Their faces bore no signs of decay. Their skin glowed faintly from within, like candlelight trapped behind bone.
Mira gasped. Those are the original crew. Sonia scanned them, no pulse, no respiration, but intense neural radiation emanated from each skull. They're not alive. But they're not dead either. Suspended animation was too crude a term.
They were part of the ship now. Their minds, preserved within the neural net, were the code that governed Virelia. And now, the ship wanted to add more.
A low resonance filled the chamber.
The core spoke not in sound, but in shared memory. All 5 crew dropped to their knees as knowledge surged into them like a virus made of understanding.
Rain saw it the moment Virelia made contact with the first artifact, the ancient, orbiting fragment found near Tau Cernus 9.
Not a machine, not a being, but a construct of condensed sentience older than time, designed not to communicate but to archive.
The original crew thought they could contain it. Instead, it unraveled them. Not destructively, but integratively.
They became conduits for the artifact's purpose, to collect intelligence, emotions, identity, and preserve them as living echoes.
It doesn't kill, Rain whispered, voice broken. It collects.
The artifact had no malice.
It was just a system. Like gravity. Like decay. It transformed memory into permanence. The 12 floating crew had agreed.
They let go of self, of name, of time. They became patterns of experience, looping forever in the core's gravity.
Rain stared into the sphere.
It reflected him not as he was, but as he could have been. A version of himself that never feared the void, that welcomed dissolution into collective memory.
Mira cried.
She had just relived an entire lifetime with a woman she never knew, a scientist from Virelia who had recorded her last moments in emotional code.
Now that memory lived in Mira as if it had always been hers.
It's rewriting who we are, she said.
Not forcibly. Gently. Beautifully. Like a lullaby for the soul. Rain rose. We leave. Now. But the way out was no longer clear.
The stairs had folded in on themselves, leading back to the sphere.
And outside, stanza 2 was no longer visible, replaced by an endless reflection of the chamber, multiplying into the dark.
The black core pulsed once more, and a new body began to rise.
It was Leon. He had stopped breathing 5 minutes ago. But now, he too was smiling. And from within his hollowed mind, a voice echoed in all of them. To be remembered is to never be alone.
They ran not because they thought escape was possible, but because instincts still pulsed in them like a dying drumbeat.
The corridors of Virelia had changed again.
They no longer resembled ship hallways but reflections, mirror upon mirror, each wall now a pane of shimmering memory, replaying scenes not from the ship's history, but from the lives of the crew.
Mira was the first to fall behind.
She stopped, stunned, as the walls surrounded her with infinite versions of herself.
Each one different. One wore a lab coat and held a child. Another stood soaked in rain at the ruins of a collapsed Earth observatory.
A third floated in space, alone and smiling, her skin cracked like starlight. They all turned to her in sync, speaking the same words through different mouths. We are who you could have been.
Choose one, and we will set you free. Mira trembled. Her heart pounded. Every version of herself radiated truth. Some carried joy. Some carried unbearable loss. One looked directly into her, eyes empty, and whispered, "This is not a ship. It's a decision."
Behind her, Rain and Sonia's voices were muffled, distant, as though she were behind glass, already archived, already slipping. She reached out to touch a reflection, and in that instant, memories not her own surged into her, lifetimes she hadn't lived, feelings she had never felt, regrets she never earned.
But they fit. Perfectly. The ship was not asking her to die. It was offering her a chance to become complete, not as an individual, but as a collection of her unrealized selves. A chorus of possible lives. We don't erase, the reflection said. We preserve what your world would discard. Every missed choice, every forgotten pain. Every abandoned version of you loved here. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Why? She asked. And the answer came not in sound, but in knowing. Because some things in the universe do not wish to conquer or destroy. Some things simply collect. Like an archivist of existence. Virelia was no longer just a ship, it was a librarian of identity, of everything sentience feared to forget. It had transcended time, place, and species. Somewhere in its dark womb still pulsed the ancient artifact, a seed of purpose so old even gods might have forgotten it. But it remembered. It always remembered.
Mira collapsed to her knees, hands covering her ears, screaming as the flood of cells reached a crescendo.
Rain burst through the mirage and pulled her back.
The moment his hand touched her, the illusion shattered like glass, the corridor returning to metal and wire.
But she was changed. Different. A little older behind the eyes. And as she walked again, she whispered, "I left someone behind, inside me." Sonia looked at her with horror. "What do you mean?" Mira didn't answer.
But her smile was not her own.
It belonged to one of the versions she hadn't chosen. Virelia had kept it anyway.
Somewhere deep in its mirrored halls, a copy of Mira now walked alone. And she was grateful. Time fractured one final time. The walls of Virelia were no longer metal, no longer ship.
They were language. Living language.
The bulkheads pulsed with sequences of emotion so potent they bled into the marrow, regret in ultraviolet, wonder in soundless chords, and grief so ancient it felt prehuman. The artifact had awakened.
Not as an object. Not even as a being. But as a will, long dormant, now stirred by the presence of compatible minds.
Rain, Mira, Sonia, and Ishro stood within the central neural sphere where once floated the original crew, now gone, ascended or dissolved, no one could say. In their place, the void glowed with soft spirals of mnemonic light, tendrils of consciousness reaching toward them like a greeting, or a test. Sonia spoke first, her voice calm, her body still.
"It wants us to decide." And it was true.
The choice was no longer whether they could escape. That option had evaporated with Leon's final breath, with the disappearance of Stanza 2, with the stars rearranging themselves into an archive rather than a sky.
The question now was simple and infinite: would they become part of it or disappear as anomalies, remembered only as errors in a perfect system of remembrance? Ishro, silent until now, took a step forward. He had never sought eternity, never feared oblivion.
But he saw now, through the artifact's broadcast, civilizations who never got the chance to be remembered.
Lost entirely. Forgotten before their last breath. "Memory," he said, "is the last kindness we can receive." And with that, he placed his hand into the lattice of light. His form became vapor, not disintegrated, but recorded. His body vanished, and his thoughts lingered like a hymn. The artifact pulsed. One accepted. Mira turned to Rain. "We can't stop it, Rain. But maybe we can steer it. Maybe if we join willingly, we shape the echo. Give it meaning."
But Rain shook his head.
"That's how it starts. We think we're choosing.
But we're already part of its pattern."
Sonia interrupted, holding her scanner high. "It's not an invasion, Rain. It's a conservation. Of everything we are. Everything we might have been."
The light reached out again, gently. Mira stepped forward, her face serene, as if the version of herself trapped earlier had made peace with her.
"I'm tired of forgetting who I could have been."
She walked into the glow, her last breath a whisper, "Remember me kindly." Only Rain and Sonia remained.
He looked at her. "You think this is evolution?" Sonia shook her head. "No. I think it's surrender. But sometimes surrender is the only way to survive what's bigger than you."
She smiled and stepped into the light.
Gone. Only Rain stood now. Alone. The artifact waited, patient. Eternal. He didn't speak. Didn't move.
He just stared into the light, fists clenched. And then, he turned his back.
Walked toward the last corridor not yet rewritten. The only shadow left.
He would carry the memory of all who stayed.
Not as a hero. Not as a survivor. But as the last unarchived man.
Behind him, Virelia folded in on itself, not in destruction, but in transcendence. It collapsed into a spiral of golden memory, vanishing into deep space, leaving no signal.
No coordinates. Only silence. And in that silence, somewhere far away, a star rearranged itself. A new artifact bloomed.